They showed the sketches and the prototypes that led to the final product, which is far more interesting if you want to understand the nature of design, because that's what did you go through. And I think that much of what I've said is sort of saying that I agree in terms of productivity, in terms of the number of years, in terms of building the backs of giants, in terms of beauty and elegance and hard work being at the essence of all aspects of science and also design. There is a place where they're extremely different. And this is in the cognitive level and process level. The principal thing that distinguishes design thinking and design process is the notion that you apply your creativity, even if you had a fight with your spouse the morning, you're hungover, you have the flu, you hate your client, and you think the entire product you're working on is stupid, and nevertheless you can be professional and come up with an unbelievably creative solution because you have a process, and that process is founded on the use of multiples, and that's what makes design different, is that design is choice. That's the simple definition of design. Design is choice. And there's two places for creativity. First of all, the choice to enumerate the things from which you choose. The creativity you bring to enumerate the multiples from which you select. And second of all, the creativity you bring in terms of the criteria whereby you make a selection from that repertoire. And sketching, critique, and all prototyping are all part of the mechanisms. They're not the process, they're the mechanisms of this process to make these choices. And that is fundamentally different. And it's been shown, there's been psychology experiments and so on looking at the process. Computer scientists have a reductionist, a very different approach. The principal thing with the problems of today, where the technologies and other things that we are putting out into the general public that require deep, deep technology, but also deep, deep design to be successful, is that if you have one calculus using the scientific approach to get to a solution, and the other one working from the design approach, if you land in the same place through two different things, you've got probably a better chance of being justified in your confidence in the solution. If you have these two processes working in parallel and landing on very different places, then that's time to blow the whistle, call time out, and go back and say, what's going on here? We are both professionals, equally skilled, equally respectful of each other's skill, and we disagree. I love those kinds of disagreements because that's now opens up the door for learning. There's something I don't understand, the scientist doesn't understand, and let's find that out. And then you've got advance. If you don't have design in there, working in partnership, you won't find those impedance mismatches that are, in fact, the most interesting spots to land.
There's another good example of a museum that was, and still is, good in communicating about design, and that's the Groningen Museum. Mm-hmm. The museum itself is design. Mendini, the Italian designer, was the main architect of the building. The museum itself tells about what design is, how it works, and tries to be its own definition. And it has been a huge, big success. I mean, something like 150,000 to 200,000 Dutch people go to Groningen, all the way to Groningen every year to see the museum and to learn about how it was built and why it was built in that way.
It's only 2.5 hours.
It's only 2.5 hours. I mean, but that's more than flying to Rome. To Sassas in Milan, etc. Professor Vijs. Yeah, there you are. Where do you stand in this debate, or what might be your question?
Well, I don't hear in the talk of Bert Meijer so much about industrial design. So I see the passion for the molecules and powders, and I congratulate the field is having Nobel prizes. But it's making a kind of caricature of industrial design, taking the superficial look of what happens at the design academy, or bringing in painters, clay, I don't know, That's not industrial design. What we are doing is translating serious knowledge from other fields and make them useful in industrial design. You may be translating principles from physics to construct molecules, my colleagues, and in the early days myself, we will be using algebra to add something to software engineering. Now knowledge from processes, knowledge from CAD, knowledge from perception theory, knowledge from ecological perception. Very serious knowledge is being imported and deployed in a serious discipline, which is industrial design.
Yeah, I can hear that you're a little angry. Yes.
Yes, because I hear a lot of rhetoric are coming to the essence of industrial design. And
Mr. Mayor, you are a dead dog.
It's very clear. We congratulate the department with 10 years of industrial design at Eindhoven University, but actually we should congratulate our university with 55 years of industrial design at this university. Because the word industrial design, if you really take it as a design that has a relevance for industry, that's what this university did for 55 years. Only the wording industrial design, by all kinds of historical reasons, has a certain subset, what is now endured in the departments in Delft and other universities, in which the aspects of art and beauty and that part is very important. Since that discriminates your activities from the industrial design, what I do, because I do industrial design from the beginning, and many of my colleagues in different departments, you get your attention, but that would discriminate you from the rest.
That's oil on the fire, Mr. Mayor.
I'm not sure. I think in the early day you would say chemistry or electrical engineering are just applications of physics. At some point there is so much serious knowledge that is decided to construct a department of its own, which is kind of a social construct. The same is happening now for industrial design. There is so much knowledge, the field is becoming more mature, and now it's deserving the same kind of social construct.
Yeah. So this is kind of interesting. If to define one's notion of and understanding of design by looking at the products of design, so your car, your iPhone, or your Windows phone, try Metro, it's really good. Is a superficial way of looking at design in the same way as saying, because I took this particular new drug and it really worked and made me better. Let's say we're moving back in time. I took an antibiotic when the penicillin was just invented, right? That I understand chemistry because I benefited from antibiotic, or I benefited from because I could make a new hybrid. I can feed a poor country because there's this new hybrid genetically modified crop. I suddenly understand bioscience. Now, of course, the object gives you no insight whatsoever into the nature of chemistry or bioscience or the process that brings those things by. And the nature of what it is to be a chemist, or the process of chemistry, the process of bioscience, any more than looking at a car gives you any insights into the process, any single car, into the process of design. And so they're both superficial. The challenge is, of course, that we all study some chemistry, some physics, some math, some biology in school. If we came to university, we did. Nobody studied design at school because it's been removed from the school programs. And so the way that we learn design is we sort of pick it up on the street. There's no formal books. Anyhow, even most of the books, I own every design book in the bibliography of my sketching book, and I have to tell you that 90% of them are garbage. They're the worst books in terms of explaining. It's sort of like the standard thing. Those who do those that don't write books about how to do it.
Okay.
And so there's a real challenge here. What's fundamentally obvious, on the one hand, I'm giving good news and bad news, and it'll be very short. The bad news is, what's clear is a deep misunderstanding of what is the essence of industrial design, of design as a discipline which is as specialized as chemistry or physics. So, with all due respect, you are not an industrial designer, and what you've been doing is not industrial design, unless one just changes the term. And
Yeah,
just,
but
you know, I understand.
Okay, give
But-
him
but-
the opportunity.
but I have to finish this.
I'll come
But-
back to I'll come back to the good side too. I'll come back to the good side too, Mr. Ryan.
Yeah, the point is, you say design, the word design and what it is, in your definition as being the only right one. That's my problem.
Right, so here's
When
the
I design a good experiment, suddenly I'm not a designer.
right, so
That's unfair.
understood, but can we agree on the following? That, two things, that the difficulty is that in math, not only have two words, we have arithmetic and math. And so it's really clear I'm working with numbers when I'm doing arithmetic versus just because I'm working with numbers doesn't mean I'm doing math, I'm doing arithmetic. And even when I'm doing math, even by the representation, we have a well-defined taxonomy of algebra, trigonometry, and so on and so forth, right? And so, unfortunately in design, we just have the word arithmetic, and it's all-encompassing. And so, the best I could offer is that, and I had this argument with my friend Don Norman, and he says everybody's a designer because they do this and that. I say, well, no, if everybody's a designer because they can arrange basic things and so on and so forth, it's the same thing as saying everybody's a mathematician because they count change when they come out of the store. So the point is that there is a difference. It's not well articulated. But I would argue that those who are in the profession have the naming rights to say this is how we define it. And the rest is design with a small d, the design with a capital D. The profession gets to define what it is, what the standards are. And that is an interesting and a productive provocation, because as soon as I say what you're doing is not design, you legitimately and quite correctly can come back and say, well, I am doing something which would generally be called design, especially by the dictionary definition you gave. I grant you that. So, Buxton, it's now, I'll throw it right back in your face. Now tell me what's different. And what are the dimensions of differentiation that define the taxonomy? So that then we can start to get to understand. When things are complex, this is George Spencer Brown's laws of form, right? Single operator in the calculus, draw a meaningful distinction. And that's how we can start to draw those distinctions. And that's we're not going to do that today in full. But that's the conversation I think is so fundamental to happen. And even without answering those questions, what I think that there is no disagreement is, with the rapid introduction of new technologies into our society and into our culture, the risk is being overwhelmed. And just as information visualization to do good chemistry is informed largely by graphic arts, understanding color theory and things like that, so are the new products essential to making technologies manageable.
I have a question for Arnaud Krombach, who arranged this debate. What is your impression so far?
I'm having fun. But I think indeed there's one thing that I'm always a guy who tries to build bridges, and I of course see differences. I think indeed Bill's definition of design as something with very solid principles is indeed something that we advocate as here at the university as the academic discipline of design. I do agree with Geert that there are a lot of things indeed where synthesis, creative synthesis is very close coming to what designers do as well. There's one thing that has struck me in both presentations as sort of an important bridge. I think that you see in design, and I call it sometimes art, people who do something because of the sake it's possible, without ever thinking about the function, the repercussions it has as a society, be it good or be it bad. I don't call those people industrial designers. I call them something else, and I don't have the right word for it. If I look back to Gert's presentation, what struck me as incredibly important is the passion that you do it for, not for the sake because it's possible, because you want to do something in a societal context. You create molecules not because it's possible, because you want to do something for the future of our planet and our children. And I think
He's a better human being, Bert.
I think both of them. What I think indeed is crucial indeed is what we do here at this technical university, whether it's in chemical engineering, chemistry, or in industrial design. We want to create things that have a meaning in society, create a difference in society. And I think indeed that is something that I found under the surface of both presentations, but which for me definitely make a difference.
Is that a bridge for you, Bert Nijger?
Yeah, I don't know whether that's a bridge. I was thinking about something else, that we could easily have exactly the same discussion about science and technology. If you have only engineers and some scientists in your year, exactly the same type of thing. And I always wonder why do we have this discussion, and especially if there is the yearly election of members of the Royal Academy of Sciences. It's obvious that it has to be a scientist, and in the United States, the Academy of Science and the Engineering of Medicine. So that apparently is the distinction. But I think that is very old-fashioned. And we don't have the discussion about science and engineering because they're really interwoven. And I think you have to do exactly the same with design. And my main problem is that I think the distinction, that was my last slide, about that it would be arts, science, and technology, would be a better distinction at the same level. But you put design as that distinction.
Do you have the feeling,
And
Mr.
I
Meijer,
can't
that,
really agree with
do
that.
you have the feeling that they want to have their cake and eat it, like they want to be scientists and artists?
Well, that's fine. If they say, well, we do arts and science, I think actually what they do is arts and technology, and arts and science, which is nothing wrong. I mean, because that's what they
Oh, that's
do.
interesting.
What I
That's
try
interesting.
the last one.
Yeah,
What I try to make clear to the audience of designers that you can be very happy with your own definition of the design, and most of the people in the street will be happy with you. But as a result, many scientists and engineers will see you as a kind of artist. And that's the message I want to get across. And whether we are right or wrong, that's not an issue. I think I speak on behalf of many of my colleagues who would say that. Make me clear, where is then the technology and the science and the
Artists
arts?
who use technology.
No, absolutely, I reject that outright. So first of all, the value of these conversations, let's be very clear. The reason I'm here, and the reason I have a commitment to this university, is because it's the place in the world better than anywhere else where these two worlds are right together. And my complete belief system is how critical it is for the future and how rare it is. And so the most important thing you're doing right here at this university. And so it's critical that the more the communities understand the value proposition that each one offers to each other with full respect, the more Eindhoven region or the Netherlands, but the population as a world as a whole, can benefit from this experiment that's going on in this very institution. And this conversation is really important to make it happen. So it's the Technical University of Eindhoven here. There's a historian of technology, Malcolm Kranzberg, who has one of the quotes that is shaped my belief system more than almost anything I've ever read. And it's the following: technology is not good, it is not bad, but nor is it neutral. Consequence, if you introduce a paperclip, which is a technology, or a social structure, which also is a technology, it doesn't have to be material, you are changing the culture. Technology is a cultural artifact that's as important to discuss in a social, cultural, political perspective as is any painting, any music, sculpture, architecture, or dance, or cinema. We never do that. But the critical thing is, in order for the next generation of technologies to succeed, they cannot exist as technologies alone. The days of technology-driven companies are over. They're over. You will not succeed if you're technology-driven. You must have something else. And what design brings is far more than trying to be amateur technologists. We work with technology. But if anything, the science that they learn about studies, the social sciences like psychology, sociology, anthropology, ethnography, the point is you cannot look at technology outside of a human context. What is fundamental to be a world-class chemist or physicist, it's really, really hard to be world-class. You have to be really deep. These are hard, non-trivial problems. It has to take 110% of your time. You do not have time to then also be a sociologist and do these other parts.
Okay.
And so you need a parallel expertise that you work in concert, where you have respect and a common ground of literacy, where you can work as a team. And I'll just finish up the following. The Renaissance is over. Renaissance, man or woman, is simply no longer possible. But the Renaissance team is possible. So just like the king is dead, long live the king. The Renaissance is over, long live the Renaissance.
You can organize in an institution, for instance, the Homo Universalis.
And when we talk about intelligent systems and intelligence, let's be very clear. Jean Piaget, who's sort of my hero in psychology, his definition of intelligence is a procedural one. It's an ecological definition of intelligence. And from his, the definition of intelligent behavior is the ability of an organism to adapt, keyword adapt, to a changing environment through the dual process of accommodation and assimilation. Our environment, largely due to technology, is absolutely changing. And the intelligence quotient of our behavior as a society, but as an institution, we're actually, after all, this is a university, a center of education, and therefore hopefully of intelligence. We should
Okay, now you'll have to really finish off. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Meyer.
No, I'm very happy with this comment, because I fully agree. But you don't address the point I like to make, that make clear to the old-fashioned scientists, artists, and engineers what that design that is, in your definition, different than only the product.
Absolutely fair comment, and it's one that if I'm critical of my own profession, the biggest criticism I've leveled, and I think I've already leveled it 3 or 4 times today, we are unbelievably inarticulate in terms of explaining what is our profession.
But when you know it for so long, how come you don't change that?
There are lots of reasons. Among them, that design is changing dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. The old school of design, all of the preconceptions of design, of things being beautiful, if you look at ID magazine, any glossy design magazine, makes heroes out of people who make beautiful things that photograph well. How do you photograph a beautiful beauty shot of an experience or of something that moves, a dynamic? The greatest design, think of it this way, design is like a toilet or your plumbing in your house. If you notice it, it's because there's stuff all over the floor and it's broken. The best design is almost invisible. It's not beautiful, it's transparent. The table and so on is transparent.
Let's ask Barry Effen for comment on this discussion. Where is he? There you are. Your comment, please.
Yes. What triggers me in these stories and is complexity. So actually in the presentation there was that movie that really And that's the thing that got me into, in the end, in design. So what you see is there the unfolding of these complex structures. And I think nowadays, if you are a designer, you are not only designing the things that you see predominantly in the Dutch Designer. So I'm one of the organizers of this week. I think it's a very big thing, and there are many aesthetical pleasing things, but there are many other things, like the discussion we have here today. So a lot of things are happening in this week. But what triggers me is this complexity, and I think that when I see such a movie, I'm wondering, it's overwhelming. And I see this picture, and you see the simple components interacting with each other and showing something so complex. And I think that's exactly what we see in the real world, and that we see happening now with products, or actually designers making products could, maybe not so complex as this, but could also design products which will play a role in the complexity that we see around. And I think, personally, and that's also the reason why I came to this university. So I first studied physics, so I did a lot of technology more than science, I have to say. But then the next phase was in psychology. So what you see is you can build physical things, but people perceive them. And it was interesting that you can build models in psychology that make you understand why they react, for instance, to music. That's my passion. But then I work at Philips, and then you see that that's not the only thing. You cannot create design that way. They will always enter real society. And that's a challenge, I think, for our designers. So that needs also other disciplines to come into the picture. We have a business group, we have a technology group, a design group, and also the understanding of the people. When these things come together, I think you can start to address this complexity, try to understand it. That's one thing. The other thing is the synthesis, and that's something I sometimes missed in science, is that you wonder, you start understanding, but for me there's always then the other part of it, trying to make something which really demonstrates that you really understand what's going on. So that's something, so what will happen is that builds a new object, a little object, a chemical object, which will enter this world. Maybe this world, what will happen with that world that we can see on this movie? It can be more interesting, or it can even stop existing, because it's very hard to understand the interactions between these components. So I like to know, and also within this faculty, understand better what the impact is of the products that we design as part of a bigger system. So for me it's about complexity, and I see it in the work of Bert, and I think design is also moving in that direction.
Okay, but can you answer the question that has put forward, the question to Bill, and he couldn't answer it really, what the definition is of design?
Of course I cannot give you the definition, but I think what I see is that it can also ruin the whole endeavor. So when people try to work together, so I think it should be just on the things that we build, but we should also be able to explain how we build it, why we build it, and hopefully also can predict a little bit what the effect will be. So I cannot give a definition of design. We have been now in this department for 10 years, and we have been discussing it for 10 years. And I think,
and I think that she has the answer.
There you go.
Hello, my name is Eva, and I was in your first slide when you started to talk about design and beauty. And on one hand, I was pleased you called it beautiful, but the main part of me, and especially now this discussion goes on, is really offended. And as the discussions go on, you also come to the word experience, and that things are not only in what it appears it is. So I actually wonder if you ever, my design is actually the carpet, which was in the middle of your slide, that apparently you didn't try it, you don't know what it is about, and it's exactly the point you seem to be frustrated about, because I don't, or a designer in one general does not respect where it came from, which you didn't in this case, and I would invite you to come over and have a look at what it is, and I will tell you a bit about the background, about the philosophy that's behind it, which is not something I made up myself, but something that has been worked on by famous people in the past that actually, I think, considered scientists. And that you should experience it, and that design is then as built. But there is also seeing in the experience of it. But I mean, there are not a lot of people from chemistry here, so it's directed to you. But I also feel a bit, I don't really understand why people would say I don't understand the beauty of chemistry if we use the word chemistry for such beautiful things that are not about molecules. So, well, my point is actually that design is indeed an experience, and I would like you to show that the carpet in my is more than the beauty that you give it its functionality.
Then I apologize for it on the slide because I believe I haven't visited, but you should take all these examples not that's serious with respect.
Was it a joke?
No. It was. The thing is, obviously, I didn't have weeks and weeks of time of preparing a few of these slides. But in trying to Google on figuring out what design was, what industrial design was, what was the Dutch Design Week, and what is then the thing that I get from that from Google, and maybe I go wrong with Google, that made me a little bit nervous about this discussion. I thought I'm entering a field that is for me so grey and so difficult to judge.
It's for them too, because so far they have not been able to give the definition you're looking for.
Yeah,
But can I just say a quick thing?
Of course.
There's a really fascinating thing here that says there's already a benefit for the common ground. We talked about the videos you made. So you see that computer 3D models of the molecules there we've got. So this was pioneered initially back at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and other places back in the 70s. We started working on 3D computer techniques. We were animators and artists who were building the techniques that are now fundamental tools of a chemist. And it's actually very difficult to imagine doing physics or chemistry today without these tools that actually grew out of people making cartoons on the computer back in the 60s. And it's just been similar. What I said about design and being transparent, and that's a success, is that a lot of these things from the arts and from design have moved into the sciences and adopted as tools, and they're so successful you don't think about them as being design things that weren't there before, and they came from a profession where we knew nothing about chemistry or when we were designing them, but we worked with chemists and physicians and physicists to make these tools. And it's really pretty fascinating. And so the guy who won an Academy Award for Toy Story from the technical scientific technology, Billy Reeves, he and I, back in 1974, developed perhaps the first computer technique to do cine angiograms and visualizations of the heart, and so you can do off a single thing. So we were working these types of so-called scientific visualization. If I was going to say in a nutshell, the kind of things that this world does is if we look at these, it's making them so they're not just movies, but things you can come in that have behaviors and where you can actually engage and manipulate and work out hypotheses within that simulation. And that's getting that. The interaction part of that is what we're good at. We will be total failures at the chemistry. That's where the teamwork comes.
There's another remark here, if you permit me.
Yeah, so my name is Serge. I have a question to you. Because I want to get back to your Google search on design. And it probably yielded the iPhone at some point. And I'm wondering why you're not proud of that product as a chemistry product.
Oh, I'm very proud of it. And I don't have any problem with design of industrial design or what you do. And the examples given are beautiful. I mean, I'm proud of the liquid crystal display how it is made, because they're beautiful molecules that are coiled, that are switching by electric fields, and you understand how it got. It's beautiful to see, and it's now in designs in my iPhone and touch.
Yes.
There are a lot as well. That's not a problem.
Yes. So you're happy that it's now in design, so that it's being used to actually achieve what you aim for, that is add something to society.
Yeah.
So in a sense that is part chemistry, but it's also for a very large part design. I mean, there were technologies, similar technologies for years, but the design is to translate it into a useful product using knowledge from other fields. They were not there, or at least they did not make the product. So in a sense, I think we need each other to create products that actually transform society in the way that you aim, but also that we aim. So maybe then we can come to the conclusion of what is design. I'm not saying that I have it, but maybe something that we can use here to communicate it. And it is that we apply knowledge from different fields, and we aim to achieve a certain result doing that. And my view is that we cannot do it alone. We can't do it alone, but also the chemist can't do it alone, because the normal man can't use chemistry.
Each is essential, none are sufficient. And can I give one very good example that illustrates the long nose? The LCD. This is one of Harry Proto's examples. LCD, if I remember the date correctly, was around 1864. There was an Austrian chemist trying to understand chlorophyll. This is a caricature thing. Saw a flash of light. What the hell is that? Spoke with a Hungarian colleague, trying to figure out what's going on. They said it must be a crystalline structure. So if I remember correctly, they went to Erlangen, where the specialists in crystals were, and in 3 months they had done the basic chemistry, understood the basic process, and named it liquid crystal. And the point there is that you have 3 people with different expertise working in a collaborative way to come up and do some brilliant work. Now, if they had have said we'd be walking around with them on our wrists, they would have locked up and thrown in the insane asylum. But nevertheless, there was a case of 3 people from 3 nations, different universities, working together in a short period of time and doing something brilliant because each brought something to the table. That was of its time. What we have today is, again, disciplines of different expertise with a different set of problems that require a different set of skills. And the potential is to do things as brilliant, but hopefully don't take over 100 years to materialize.
Maybe I take this example, maybe that also helps the discussion of the industrial design. So that's my field of expertise, liquid crystal, things like this. I know that it was there from 1886 until about, I would say, somewhere in the 1970s. Then it was the scientific endeavor that people were looking to that new phase. And then it has to, people suddenly had the idea you can switch. And then another about 20 years with engineers, people were working on it, getting a display out of it. I think it at least took 20 years, but I worked at that time at Philips, and it was a very small device and all kinds of errors in, and some people would say they will never become a display. But they figured out that in Asia they're a little bit better, maybe working very clean. And in these 20 years, it was really the technology that brought it into the design. Really, only technology was involved. Now, in order to make it a real success as we use it today, it probably is the last function. It was for the industrial design people to use it in a way that it is handy, that you like it, that you have a look to it. Because if it would look like the old television, you probably wouldn't have used it. So I see very clearly how important it is to have the industrial design to go after the first inventions, the engineering, and to make it in something.
But let me show you what we do. Okay, this is my job. Okay, this is what we do. So take the LCD. What the experienced designer says is that for me, here was I had 2 paper cups. I knew when I was a child, 2 paper cups of a piece of string, I could make a walkie-talkie, right? You can talk. Interesting thing is, I only had 1 paper cup, and it worked as both the microphone and the loudspeaker. The acoustic transducer is bidirectional. That was as a designer. I asked one of the engineers who was working this way. So I said, why can't the optical display, the LCD, be the same way? So the display is both a scanner and a device. So we started to work on that.
And so we made an LCD, driven from what I wanted to do from the interaction side. So I could take a piece of paper and hold it up like I could in the refrigerator with a magnet and just have something scanned. So that my computer screen can see as well as present. That it's bidirectional like that paper cup. And so you take that to the chemists and the physicists, the electrical engineers, who say, how can we make this happen? So that the display, it's an optical sensor and pixel, that the pixels, you can think of it as a fourth pixel. There's a RGB plus I for input or imaging. And then you start saying, if you do that, and you make it thin, and you can make it about 10 euros a square foot, then we completely transform. It's completely driven from the design and user experience, from the human side. And then you throw this problem and say, if you can get the chemistry right, and get the materials and the manufacturing right, and the economics right, we'll work on how to make these things have a completely new market than being televisions and just being things that treat people like sponges, that they absorb what's coming from it, but they're completely bidirectional. And in some sense, that's what Microsoft Surface is about. But this is the kind of thing that happens, that there's new kinds of challenges, and I could never know how to do the science to make that kind of bidirectional display.
There's another question or remark from here.
Hello, my name is Esam Baha, and I'm a designer who's passionate about history.